The Ghost of Seoul doesn't stop for anyone. But when a withered, trembling hand snatched his designer sleeve, the most dangerous man in Korea froze. His security detail drew their weapons, but young Ku-beom killed the movement with a single look. "Please," the elderly woman whispered, her voice cracking. "He's killing my daughter." Ku-beom's gaze snapped across the street. There, pinned against a rusted brick wall, was Vicky Ward. A man twice her size, Kelton Vaughn, had his hand crushed around her throat, his face twisted in a predatory grin. Vicky's eyes, wide and terrified, met Ku-beom's from across the divide. The security team waited for the order to clear the nuisance, but the order never came. Because Ku-beom recognized those eyes. He remembered the woman they belonged to. And he remembered exactly why he'd spent the last 5 years trying to forget her. "Get the car," Ku-beom commanded, his voice a low, lethal growl. Tonight, the Ghost of Seoul was about to remind the city why people feared his name. Tonight, he was going to make Kelton Vaughn regret ever drawing breath. He stepped out of the gala's light and into the hunt. The tires of the black sedan screeched against the wet asphalt, a sound like a hunting hawk's cry, as it pulled to the curb. Ku-beom didn't wait for his lead guard to open the door. He was out before the vehicle had fully settled, his heavy wool coat catching the wind like a dark wing. He moved toward the alley with a predatory grace that defied the torrential downpour. Behind him, 4 men in tactical suits fanned out, their silhouettes forming a wall that shut out the rest of the world. In the mouth of the alley, the air felt different, thicker, smelling of damp brick and a sharp, metallic tang of fear. Kelton Vaughn had Vicky backed into a corner where a rusted dumpster leaked foul-smelling runoff. He had his forearm pressed against her throat, his other hand twisting her wrist behind her back. He was laughing, a jagged, ugly sound that cut through the rhythm of the rain. "You thought you could just disappear, Vicky?" Kelton sneered, leaning his weight into her. "Nobody hides from a debt like yours. Not in this city." Vicky's face was turned away, her eyes squeezed shut, her lips moving in a silent prayer or perhaps a plea for her mother. She didn't see the shadow approaching. She only felt the sudden, jarring absence of the pressure against her neck. Ku-beom didn't shout. He didn't issue a warning. He simply reached out and gripped Kelton's shoulder. The movement was deceptively light, but when he twisted, the sound of Kelton's joint popping was audible even over the storm. With a sharp, clinical jerk, Ku-beom tore the man away from Vicky as if he were nothing more than a piece of discarded litter. Kelton spun around, his face contorting in a mask of rage. "Who the hell do you think?" The words died in his throat. He looked up, and for the first time, he saw the face of the man standing over him. Ku-beom stood perfectly still, his wet hair swept back, his almond-shaped eyes glowing with a lethal, amber-tinted intensity. He looked less like a man and more like an ancient statue of a vengeful god. "Let go of her," Ku-beom said. The words weren't a request, they were a sentence passed by a judge. Kelton, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and stupidity, reached for a jagged blade tucked into his waistband. He never even cleared leather. Ku-beom stepped into his space, his movement a blur of efficiency. A palm strike to the chin snapped Kelton's head back. A follow-up kick to the knee sent him crashing to the flooded pavement. Before Kelton could draw a breath to scream, Ku-beom's polished leather shoe was resting heavily on his throat, pinning him to the grime. "You're making a mistake," Kelton wheezed, his face turning a mottled purple. "Do you know who I work for?" "I don't care about the hand that feeds you," Ku-beom replied, his voice a low, terrifying rasp. "I only care about the hand that touched her. And if you don't take it off the ground right now, I'll make sure you never use it again." Ku-beom's guards moved in, hoisting the gasping Kelton up and dragging him toward the back of a secondary vehicle. They handled him with the practiced indifference of men taking out the trash. The violence had lasted less than 30 seconds. Now, the alley was silent except for the heavy splash of water from a broken gutter. Ku-beom turned toward the woman trembling against the brick. Vicky was shaking so violently her teeth were chattering. Her neutral-tone sweater was soaked and stained with alley grime. She looked up, her large, expressive dark eyes searching his face. For a moment, the terror in her gaze flickered, replaced by a shock so profound it seemed to stop her heart. Ku-beom, she whispered. The name sounded strange in the Seoul air, a ghost of a memory from a different life, a different continent. He stepped toward her, his expression softening just a fraction, though his jaw remained a hard, protective line. He stripped off his heavy coat and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was still warm from his body, and it nearly swallowed her whole. I told you once, he said, his voice dropping to a register meant only for her. I told you that if you ever needed me, I would come. Did you think I was lying? Vicky looked at him, the rain mingling with the tears on her cheeks. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers grazing the fine wool of his suit, as if to verify he wasn't a hallucination born of her trauma. Behind them, Helen Ward appeared at the mouth of the alley, supported by one of Ku-beom's guards. The elderly woman's eyes met Ku-beom's, and she gave a single, slow nod of profound gratitude. We have to go, Ku-beom said, his hand finding the small of Vicky's back, guiding her toward the idling car. This place isn't safe. Nowhere in this city is safe for you right now, except with me. As the door of the luxury sedan clicked shut, sealing them away from the cold and the filth, Vicky sank into the leather seat. She was safe, but as she looked at the profile of the man beside her, the man who ruled this city with a heart of ice, she realized that the rescue was only the beginning. The Ghost of Seoul had claimed her, and in his world, protection always came with a price. The ascent to the penthouse was a journey through a vacuum of silence. The private elevator hummed with a clinical, high-tech vibration that felt worlds away from the grime and screams of the alleyway. Inside the mirrored box, Ku-beom stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the digital floor numbers climbing toward the sky. Beside him, Vicky was a ghost of the woman he had once known. She was wrapped in his heavy overcoat, the hem dragging on the polished floor, her small hands clutching the lapels as if they were a lifeline. Behind them, Helen sat on a retractable bench, her head bowed, her lips moving in a silent, rhythmic prayer of exhaustion. When the doors slid open, they stepped into a sanctuary of glass and black marble. The estate was a fortress disguised as a masterpiece, overlooking a Seoul that looked like a circuit board of neon blue and white. Ku-beom signaled to his staff with a curt nod. Within seconds, thick towels, heated blankets, and tea were brought forward by silent attendants who disappeared as quickly as they arrived. Take Mrs. Ward to the guest wing, Ku-beom commanded softly. See to her comfort. Call the private physician to check her vitals. I want no excuses. Helen paused, her tired eyes meeting Ku-beom's. She didn't speak, but the way she squeezed Vicky's hand before being led away told him everything. She knew who he was, not the Ghost of Seoul, but the man from the before. Then, the heavy oak doors of the grand salon clicked shut, leaving Ku-beom and Vicky alone in the vast, amber-lit space. The only sound was the muffled drumming of the storm against the reinforced glass. Vicky finally let the coat slip from her shoulders. Beneath it, her neutral sweater was damp, clinging to her skin. She turned to face him, her natural curly hair wild and haloed by the soft recessed lighting. For a long, agonizing minute, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with the weight of 5 lost years, 5 years of silence, of assumed deaths, and of a city called London where they had once been 2 nobodies in love. You look different, Vicky whispered, her voice trembling but her gaze steady. The man I knew in Mayfair didn't wear $3,000 suits. He didn't have men with guns waiting for his every breath. Ku-beom stepped into the light, the sharp lines of his jaw catching the glow. The man you knew in Mayfair was alive, Vicky. He was a prince in hiding, waiting for a crown he didn't want. This, he gestured to the cold, opulent room, is the truth. This is the monster that came home to claim his throne. He walked toward her, his footsteps echoing on the marble. He stopped just inches away, close enough to see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, eyes that had haunted his every night since the day she vanished. Why did you run? He asked, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. That night in London, I woke up to an empty bed and a bloodstain on the sheets. My father's men were at the door, and you were gone. I thought they had killed you. I spent a year burning down every rival house I suspected of taking you, only to find you tonight in a gutter in Seoul." Vicky's breath hitched. She reached up, her fingers hovering near his cheek before she pulled back, afraid of the heat. "I didn't run because I wanted to, Ku-beom. I ran because your father found me first. He showed me the photos. He told me that as long as I was with you, you would never be the leader the syndicate needed. He said my life was the price of your survival. I left to save you from them." Ku-beom's expression didn't break, but a muscle in his jaw flared. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow. All the rage he had carried, the cold indifference he had cultivated like armor, was built on a foundation of his own family's treachery. "You were always my survival, Vicky," he said, his hand finally reaching out to cup the side of her face. His thumb brushed over her warm brown skin, a sharp contrast to his light, beige complexion. "Without you, I've just been a ghost haunting a city of glass." Vicky leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as a single tear escaped. "I saw you on the news 3 years ago. I saw the Ghost of Seoul. I knew then that the man I loved was gone. I tried to build a life for my mother, to stay hidden, but Kelton found us. He knew about London. He knew I was your only remaining pulse." Ku-beom leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. The scent of her, the faint traces of vanilla beneath the rain, shattered the last of his composure. The dragon was gone. There was only a man who had finally found his heart in the middle of a war zone. "Kelton Vaughn is a dead man walking," Ku-beom promised, his voice a lethal vow. "But more than that, my father's legacy ends tonight. No one uses you as a pawn again. Not the syndicates, not the debt collectors, and certainly not my bloodline." He pulled back just enough to look deep into her eyes, searching for the spark of the girl from Mayfair. "You're in my world now, Vicky. It's a world of shadows, but I swear on my life, those shadows will never touch you again." Vicky looked at him, at the sharp, masculine features of the most feared man in the country, and for the first time in 5 years, she felt the crushing weight of fear begin to lift, replaced by a terrifying, electric hope. She was in the den of a predator, but for her, it was the only home she had left. "Now," Ku-beom said, and for the first time, a dark, terrible smile touched his lips. "The debt is transferred. They think they've lured a man into a trap. They don't realize they've just invited a demon into their home. They wanted me to care? I will show them exactly how much I care. I'm going to liquidate every asset the Choice own, from their shipping docks to the rings on their fingers. This isn't about a loan anymore. This is a debt of blood." He turned to his lead guard, who was waiting by the door. "Bring me Kong Min-suk, and tell the cleaners to find out everything Kelton Vaughn knows before he stops breathing. We aren't just defending this house anymore. We're erasing theirs." Vicky watched him, seeing the transition from the man she loved to the monster the city feared. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. The Ghost of Seoul was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, a man with something to lose. The heavy oak doors of the grand salon clicked shut, but the atmosphere remained charged with the electric hum of a war room. Ku-beom did not waste time with sentiment. He moved to a sleek, obsidian console and tapped a sequence that caused the floor-to-ceiling windows to tint into an opaque, reflective charcoal. "From this moment, this penthouse is the only safe ground in Seoul," Ku-beom said, his voice regaining its sharp, executive edge. He turned to his lead security chief, a man whose shadow was as long as his loyalty. "Increase the perimeter. I want drone surveillance on a 24-hour loop. If a bird flies within a mile of this terrace, I want to know its heartbeat." He turned back to Vicky, who was still standing by her mother, the oversized wool coat making her look small but defiant. "You and your mother will stay in the south wing. It's reinforced with ballistic glass and has a dedicated air filtration system. You don't leave. You don't use personal devices. My team will provide encrypted lines if you need to reach anyone. But for the world outside these walls, you no longer exist." Vicky stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "Ku-beom, you're talking like we're prisoners. We've spent 5 years hiding in the dark. I thought coming to you meant we could finally stop looking over our shoulders. It means you stop looking because I am the one doing the looking, he countered, his almond-shaped eyes flashing with a mix of possessiveness and pragmatism. The Choi Syndicate didn't just stumble upon you. They've been cultivating this debt like a garden. By bringing you here, I've pulled the weeds, but the gardener is still out there, and he's hungry. As Vicky led Helen toward the guest quarters, the elevator chimed again. Out stepped Kong Min-suk, Ku-beom's chief of operations. Min-suk was a man of sharp angles and even sharper ambitions, his silver-rimmed glasses catching the dim light of the salon. He looked at the discarded teacups and the lingering scent of civilian life with visible distaste. Director Yang, Min-suk began, bowing just low enough to be respectful but not enough to be subservient. The board is already calling. They saw the footage from the gala. The ghost breaking cover to rescue a foreign woman and her mother. It doesn't look like strength, sir. It looks like a lapse in judgment. The stock in our shipping holdings is already twitching. Ku-beom didn't blink. He walked to a side table and poured a glass of neat whiskey, the ice clinking like a countdown. Then tell the board to stop looking at the stock and start looking at the choice. By tomorrow morning, I want the Choi Syndicate's logistics hubs in Incheon paralyzed. Every bribe they've paid, every inspector they've bought, I want the paper trail on my desk. Min-suk tightened his grip on his tablet. And the women? Keeping them here is a beacon. If you want to protect the syndicate's interests, you should move them to a black site. Somewhere, less central to your own life. Ku-beom paused, the glass halfway to his lips. He turned his head slowly, his gaze pinning Min-suk to the spot. The air in the room grew heavy, the kind of pressure that precedes a lightning strike. They stay here, Ku-beom said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. Because they are the only interests I have left. If the board has a problem with my judgment, tell them they are welcome to come up here and discuss it with me personally. But remind them that the last man who questioned my focus is still missing a tongue. Min-suk paled, his throat working as he swallowed a retort. He bowed again, deeper this time. I will relay the message, Director. As Min-suk retreated, Ku-beom felt the walls of his fortress closing in. He had spent years building this empire of glass and steel to be impenetrable, a monument to his own indifference. But as he looked toward the closed door of the guest wing, he realized the truth. A fortress was only as strong as its foundation, and for the first time in 5 years, his foundation wasn't made of stone. It was made of the woman sleeping in the next room, and the secret she carried that could either save his soul or burn his kingdom to the ground. The red neon sign of the Velvet Dragon, one of Ku-beom's most lucrative underground lounges in Gangnam, flickered under the relentless assault of the midnight rain. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and the low thrum of bass, a sanctuary for the city's elite to indulge in their vices. But the peace was shattered not by a sound, but by the sudden, violent absence of light. The music cut. The emergency lights kicked in, bathing the room in a sickly, strobing crimson. Before the patrons could scream, the front glass, reinforced and expensive, disintegrated into a million diamond-like shards as a stolen delivery truck reversed through the entrance with the force of a battering ram. From the back of the vehicle, half a dozen men poured out, their faces masked, wielding iron bars and short-bladed knives. They weren't there to rob the vault. They were there to destroy the prestige. They moved with a jagged, undisciplined aggression, smashing crystal decanters and overturning mahogany tables. At the center of the chaos stood one of Kelton Vaughn's lieutenants, a scarred man who didn't look for the money, but for the cameras. He looked directly into a hidden lens and dragged a blade across a portrait of Ku-beom that hung behind the bar, a silent declaration of war. Across the city, in the sterile, high-tech silence of the penthouse, Ku-beom watched the feed on a wall of monitors. His face was a mask of cold marble, the blue light of the screens reflecting in his almond-shaped eyes. Beside him, Kong Min-suk tapped frantically at a tablet. "It's a provocation, Director," Min-suk hissed, his voice tight with anxiety. "They're hitting a public-facing asset. If you don't send the full tactical response team now, The other syndicates will see it as a sign that you're distracted by the guests. Ku-beom didn't move. His gaze wasn't on the destruction of the lounge, but on the peripheral cameras covering the alleyways around the Velvet Dragon. He saw a second group of vehicles idling 2 blocks away. Heavy, blacked-out SUVs that didn't belong to Kelton Vaughn's street crew. "It's a feint," Ku-beom said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "Kelton's men are the bait. They want me to empty this building of my primary security detail. The moment my tactical teams hit Gangnam, the real strike team, the choice, will move on this penthouse." At that moment, the door to the salon opened. Vicky stood there, her natural curls pulled back, wearing a borrowed silk robe that looked too large for her slight frame. She had seen the flicker of the monitors from the hallway. "Is it happening?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear radiating from her. "Are they coming for us because you saved me?" Ku-beom turned his head just enough to see her. The sight of her vulnerability against the backdrop of his burning business sparked a fire in him that threatened to consume his clinical detachment. He walked over to her, his polished shoes crunching on nothing but the silence of the room. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a physical shield. "They are trying to test the weight of my resolve," Ku-beom said, his eyes locking onto hers. "They think they can trade a lounge for my focus. They think I will choose my money over your safety." He turned back to the monitors and spoke into his lapel mic, his voice dropping into a register that signaled a death sentence. "Unit 4, execute the shadow protocol at the lounge. Use non-lethal deterrents to push them into the street. Do not deploy the main garrison. Let the choice wait in the dark until they rot." And Min-suk, the chief of operations, looked up, startled. "Trace the truck. I don't want the drivers. I want the warehouse where they prepped it. By dawn, I want that building leveled. No survivors, no sirens." Ku-beom turned back to Vicky. The ghost was gone, replaced by a man who was beginning to enjoy the hunt. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek before he thought better of it, his fingers curling into a fist of restrained power. "They want a distraction," he whispered. "But all they've done is remind me why I need to burn their world to the ground." The screens showed the masked men being driven back by a sudden burst of high-intensity flashbangs and tear gas, but the real war was just beginning. The first strike had failed to draw the dragon out of his nest, and in the silence of the penthouse, the air grew heavy with the realization that the next move would be far more personal. The penthouse was a tomb of glass, silent save for the rhythmic humming of the servers and the distant, muffled roar of the Seoul rain. Ku-beom stood in the center of the dark salon, his reflection caught in the obsidian table, a man who looked less like a savior and more like a ghost. He had spent the last hour watching the wards sleep through the thermal feed, their heat signatures glowing like embers in a world of ice. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of something other than his own ambition. He felt the weight of a target on his back that he had painted there himself. The chime of the private elevator was sharp, a jagged edge cutting through the stillness. Kong Min-suk stepped out, his posture stiff, his silver-rimmed glasses reflecting the blue light of the security monitors. He didn't approach the center of the room. He lingered by the shadows of the foyer, his tablet clutched against his chest like a shield. "Director," Min-suk began, his voice devoid of its usual sycophantic warmth. "The emergency board meeting has concluded. They are concerned. The attack on the Velvet Dragon was a PR disaster. The investors aren't seeing a strategic defense, they are seeing a distraction. They are seeing a man who has abandoned the logic of the syndicate for the sentiment of a ghost." Ku-beom didn't turn around. He watched Min-suk's reflection in the glass. "The board is paid to be concerned, Min-suk. I am paid to be the reason they sleep at night. Tell them the situation is under control." "Is it?" Min-suk's voice rose, a tremor of defiance leaking through. "You've grounded the primary strike team to guard 2 civilians. You've paralyzed our logistics to hunt a street thug like Kelton Vaughn. You aren't acting like a director anymore, Ku-beom. You're acting like a lover." Ku-beom turned then, his movements slow and agonizingly deliberate. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "Be careful, Min-suk. You are speaking to the man who built this house. Do not forget who holds the keys." Min-suk didn't flinch. Instead, he placed his tablet on a marble console and slid it toward Ku-beom. The board didn't just meet to discuss the lounge. They met to discuss a succession plan. They believe your father was right, that the foreign woman is your terminal weakness. They've already reached out to the Choi Syndicate. They want a merger, Ku-beom, a peace treaty that involves returning the wards to the street to settle the Choi's debt. Ku-beom looked down at the tablet. It wasn't a report. It was an encrypted chat log. His own inner circle, men he had bled with, men he had made millionaires, were coordinating with the Choice. The betrayal wasn't a sudden strike. It was a slow, calculated rot. They were planning to disable the penthouse's security overrides at midnight, turning his fortress into a slaughterhouse. They think they can vote me out of my own life? Ku-beom's voice was a low, tectonic growl. They think they can survive without you, Min-suk countered, his eyes narrowing behind his lenses. They see a king who is willing to burn the kingdom for a single woman, and they've decided they'd rather have a kingdom without a king. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Ku-beom felt the cold reality of his isolation. He had built an empire on indifference, and now that he cared for something, the empire was trying to purge him like an infection. He walked toward Min-suk, stopping only when he was inches from the other man's face. He could see the sweat beating on Min-suk's forehead, the frantic pulse in his neck. And you, Min-suk? Where do you stand? Are you here to warn me? Or are you here to see if I've already been broken? Min-suk swallowed hard, his hands trembling. I've always been a man of numbers, director. And the numbers say you're going to lose. But I also remember who saved me from the gutter 10 years ago. I'm giving you the log so you can run. Take the women and get out of the city. If you're here at midnight, the security grid will drop, and I won't be able to stop what happens next. Ku-beom grabbed Min-suk by the collar, his grip iron tight. For a second, the mask of the ghost slipped, revealing a raw, terrifying fury. I don't run, Min-suk. I am the Dragon of Seoul. If they want this throne, they will have to take it from my cold, dead hands. And if they want the wards, they will have to walk through a lake of fire to get to them. He shoved Min-suk back and turned toward the guest wing, where Vicky was likely standing behind the door, having heard every word of the whispered betrayal. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't just fighting a rival syndicate anymore. He was fighting his own shadow. Prepare the armory, Ku-beom commanded, his voice echoing through the hollow opulence of the penthouse. And Min-suk, if you've lied to me about whose side you're on, make sure you're the first one through that door at midnight. I'd hate to make you wait for your turn. As the elevator doors closed on a terrified Min-suk, Ku-beom stood alone in his glass cage. The betrayal was complete. His allies were gone, his board was bought, and the clock was ticking toward a midnight that promised only blood. He looked out at the city he ruled, realizing that the only thing he truly owned was the woman in the next room. And for her, he would let the whole world burn. The silence in the south wing was different from the clinical quiet of the salon. It was a fragile, human silence, broken only by the soft, rhythmic click of a suitcase latch. Ku-beom stood in the doorway, his silhouette casting a long, jagged shadow across the cream-colored carpet. He watched as Vicky folded a worn sweater, the same one she had been wearing in the rain, with trembling hands. Her movements were frantic, driven by a desperate, selfless kind of panic. Where do you think you're going? Ku-beom's voice was a low, dangerous vibration. Vicky didn't look up. I heard him, Ku-beom. I heard Min-suk. You're bored. Your men, they're turning on you because of us. Because of me. She finally looked at him, her large dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears. You've spent years building this. I won't be the reason it all turns to ash. If I leave, if I go to the Choice myself, maybe they'll leave you alone. Maybe you can go back to being the ghost. Ku-beom stepped into the room, his presence instantly shrinking the space. He reached out, his hand closing over hers, forcing her to stop the frantic packing. Her skin was warm, a sharp contrast to the cold steel of the life he led. The ghost is dead, Vicky, he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. He died the moment your mother whispered your name in the rain. Do you really think I care about a seat at a boardroom table? Do you think I care about the loyalty of men who would sell their souls for a percentage of a shipping lane? You should, she cried, pulling her hand away. This is your life. This city, this power, it's who you are now. I'm just a memory from a different life. I'm a liability. Ku-beom grabbed her by the shoulders, not with the clinical violence he used on his enemies, but with a raw, grounding intensity. You are not a liability. You are the only thing in this city that is real. Everything else, the money, the suits, the fear, it's just smoke. I've spent 5 years breathing that smoke, Vicky. I was choking on it until I saw you. He leaned down, his forehead pressing against hers, his eyes searching hers with a vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself since London. Minsuk thinks he's giving me a choice. He thinks I can choose between my empire and you. But he's wrong. There is no choice. If the empire wants to stand between me and the woman I love, then the empire has to burn. Vicky's breath hitched. You'd lose everything? For me, I've already lost everything once, Ku-beom replied, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. I'm not doing it again. They think they're trapping me here at midnight. They think they're taking away my power. They don't realize that for the first time in 5 years, I actually have something worth fighting for. That doesn't make me weak, Vicky. It makes me infinite. He pulled her into a fierce, protective embrace, burying his face in her natural curls. The scent of her, vanilla and resilience, cleared the last of the ghost's indifference from his mind. Stay, he commanded, no longer as a boss, but as a man pleading for his heart. Let them come. Let them see what happens when you try to take a dragon's treasure. I'm not running, and I'm sure as hell not letting you go. Vicky sank into him, her hands clutching the back of his shirt as the suitcase lay forgotten on the bed. The final warning had been delivered, but it wasn't the one the board intended. It was Ku-beom's warning to the world. He would rather rule a kingdom of ruins with her than a kingdom of gold without her. The clock on the wall ticked toward 11 p.m. The siege was an hour away, and in the heart of the fortress, the ghost was finally gone, replaced by a king preparing for his final stand. The transition from the clinical luxury of the penthouse to the industrial rot of the Incheon docks was a descent into a mechanical purgatory. The air here didn't smell of rain. It smelled of salt, diesel, and the iron scent of impending violence. Ku-beom had traded his tailored wool overcoat for a tactical black jacket, his wet hair now plastered back, revealing the sharp, predatory lines of his face. He didn't come with an army. He came with the 4 men whose loyalty hadn't been bought by the board. The men who still remembered that a dragon's power didn't come from a ledger, but from the fear he inspired. The warehouse was a cavernous ribcage of rusted steel and shipping containers, illuminated by the flickering, sickly orange of sodium lamps. At the far end, surrounded by a dozen of his remaining street soldiers and a handful of choice syndicate mercenaries, Kelton Vaughn stood. He looked ragged, a man cornered and desperate, his hand still twitching toward the heavy pistol tucked into his belt. You're a fool, Ku-beom. Kelton's voice echoed against the corrugated metal, high and jagged with a manic edge. Your board has already signed the papers. Your security codes are being wiped as we speak. You're not a boss anymore. You're a dead man walking into his own grave. Ku-beom didn't stop walking. His boots clicked against the concrete with a rhythmic, terrifying precision. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't even raise his hands. He simply kept coming, his almond-shaped eyes locked onto Kelton with a focus so absolute it seemed to pull the oxygen from the room. The board signed papers, Ku-beom said, his voice a low, tectonic growl that cut through the humming of the warehouse generators. But papers don't bleed. Papers don't pull triggers. And papers certainly don't protect you from me. A Choi mercenary raised a submachine gun, but before he could level the barrel, a single shot from Ku-beom's lead guard took him out with surgical efficiency. The warehouse erupted. The sound was a symphony of chaos, the shattering of glass, the rhythmic thud of suppressed fire, and the heavy clang of metal. Ku-beom moved through the crossfire like a ghost. He didn't dive for cover. He used the environment, slipping between shipping containers and pivoting behind steel pillars. When a man lunged at him with a serrated blade, Ku-beom didn't flinch. He caught the man's wrist, twisted it until the bone snapped like dry kindling, and used the momentum to hurl him into a stack of wooden pallets. It wasn't just a fight, it was a clinical extraction. He reached Kelton in the center of the kill zone. The street thug fired a frantic shot that grazed Ku-beom's shoulder, tearing the fabric of his jacket, but the dragon didn't even blink. He stepped into Kelton's space, his hand lashing out like a viper to catch the man's throat. The strength in Ku-beom's grip was impossible, the result of a lifetime spent mastering the art of controlled destruction. He lifted Kelton off the ground, the man's legs kicking uselessly in the air as his face turned a dark, mottled purple. "You touched her," Ku-beom whispered, his eyes burning with a terrifying, amber fire. "You thought you could use her as a pawn in a game you weren't even invited to play. The choice, they'll kill you." Kelton wheezed, clawing at Ku-beom's iron grip. "The choice are next," Ku-beom replied. He slammed Kelton back against a steel container with enough force to dent the metal. With his free hand, he drew a small, silver-plated dagger, the only heirloom he had kept from his father. "But you won't be around to see it. You wanted to know why I'm the boss. It's not because of the money, Kelton. It's because I'm the only one willing to do what's necessary to keep what's mine." With a movement too fast for the eye to follow, Ku-beom ended the threat. He didn't look down at the body. He didn't wait for his men to clear the remaining mercenaries. He turned toward the exit, the fire of the warehouse reflecting in his eyes. Behind him, the sounds of the struggle died down, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic breathing of his loyalists. Ku-beom wiped a smear of blood from his cheek with the back of his hand and looked toward the city skyline. The board thought they had removed him. The choice thought they had trapped him. But as he stood in the heart of the wreckage, the Ghost of Seoul was truly gone. In his place stood a man who had finally realized that power wasn't about holding a throne. It was about protecting the heart that beat for him. "Call the penthouse," Ku-beom commanded, his voice cold and absolute. "Tell Vicky it's over. And tell Min-suk, I'm coming for my crown." The dawn that broke over Seoul was not the usual gray of a rainy morning. It was a searing, liquid gold that bled across the glass towers, signaling the end of a long, dark night. Inside the penthouse, the air was still, but it no longer felt like the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. It was the quiet of a house that had survived a storm. Ku-beom stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. He had changed back into a fresh charcoal suit, but he hadn't put on the tie. His top button was undone, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing the dragon tattoo that seemed to glow in the morning light. He looked less like the ghost, now, and more like a man who had finally stepped into the sun. The elevator chimed, and Kong Min-suk stepped out. He was pale, his silver-rimmed glasses slightly askew, and he moved with the tentative steps of a man walking on thin ice. Behind him, two of the board members followed, their usual arrogance replaced by a profound, shaking fear. They didn't look at Ku-beom, they looked at the floor. "The Choice Syndicate has filed for bankruptcy protection," Min-suk whispered, his voice cracking. "Their logistics hubs are being seized by the state, and the board has retracted the succession plan. They wish to offer their sincerest apologies for the misunderstanding." Ku-beom didn't turn around. He watched their reflections in the glass. "Apologies are for the weak, Min-suk. I don't want your words. I want your resignation. And theirs." He gestured vaguely toward the board members. "By noon, I want a new council formed. Men who understand that this syndicate is no longer a business of ghosts. It is a house. And in this house, we protect our own." The men bowed so low their foreheads nearly touched the marble before they retreated into the elevator, scurrying away like shadows at midday. A soft footfall sounded behind him. Ku-beom didn't need to look to know it was her. He could feel the shift in the air, the way the coldness in his chest simply evaporated. Vicky walked up beside him, draped in a soft, cream-colored pashmina. Her large, expressive dark eyes were no longer clouded by terror, but bright with a cautious, beautiful hope. Helen followed behind her, her worn headscarf replaced by a fine silk one, her hand resting gently on her daughter's shoulder. "Is it really over?" Vicky asked, her voice a warm, grounding melody. Ku-beom turned to her, his almond-shaped eyes softening in a way that would have terrified his enemies. He reached out and took her hand, his light beige skin a striking contrast against her warm brown palm. The war is over, Vicky. The choice are gone. The board is purged. There is no one left to whisper in the shadows. He led them toward the terrace, where the city of Seoul lay spread out beneath them like a kingdom of light. I spent 5 years ignoring everyone because I thought that was the only way to be strong, he said, looking at Vicky and then at Helen. I thought a king had to be alone. I was wrong. A king is only as strong as the people he protects. Helen gave him a slow, knowing nod. You saved my daughter, Ku-beom. You brought us out of the gutter and into the light. That is the mark of a true leader. Vicky leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. What happens now? Ku-beom looked out at the horizon, where the sun was fully reclaiming the sky. Now, we build something that doesn't rely on fear. We build a life where you never have to hide again. This isn't just a syndicate anymore, Vicky. This is our home. He looked down at her, the sharp masculine features of his face finally relaxed, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. He was no longer the boss who ignored the world. He was the protector who had finally found his world. The Ghost of Seoul was truly gone, and in his place, a king had finally taken his throne, not for the power, but for the love that made him infinite. As the city below began its morning hum, the three of them stood together on the edge of the sky, watching the light wash away the last of the shadows. The reign of the dragon had begun, but this time, he wasn't fighting for an empire of ghosts. He was fighting for a family.